The high lonesome wind carried the scent of pine and approaching winter as Silas McCall rode his paint mower down the rocky switchback toward the trading post. His calloused hands gripped the reins with the memory of a dozen hard years spent trapping and running cattle on borrowed land. The pelt sack hanging behind his saddle held only 3 mangy coyote skins, a bitter reward after a month of empty trap lines and sleepless nights. He needed a miracle, maybe 10 good beaver plews, to pay his note and keep his tiny cabin from falling back into the bank's cold hands. The trading post sat squat and stubborn by the creek, its porch crowded with freighters and a fancy surrey that gleamed with brass fittings. Silas swung down and looped his reins, feeling the ache in his bones that told him he was getting too old for this unforgiving country at just 32. A woman's voice cut through the low murmur of bartering men like a silver spur catching sunlight, clear and deliberately bold. Isabella Fontaine stepped from the surrey in a traveling dress of burgundy velvet, her eyes fixed on Silas with unsettling and immediate calculation. She was the daughter of a wealthy fur merchant from St. Louis, and everyone within 100 miles knew her name and her dangerous reputation for getting exactly what she wanted. Isabella walked straight up to Silas, ignoring the stares of the rough-cut men, and placed her gloved hand directly on his dusty sleeve with fearless intent. She spoke in a near whisper that carried all the weight of a binding legal contract, proposing a deal that made his stomach tighten with sudden wary confusion. 10 prime beaver furs, she said, already bundled and cured, would be his if he spent one single night alone with her in her private camp. Silas blinked hard, searching her face for mockery, but found only the steady stare of a woman who was accustomed to buying whatever she desired without argument. He asked what kind of night she meant, and Isabella laughed softly, saying she needed a rugged man to play a role that would send a persistent suitor packing for good. A pompous cattle baron named Whitfield had been pressuring her for marriage, and she needed to present a formidable, seemingly dangerous lover to scare him away permanently. Silas considered the desperate weight of his debt, the emptiness of his larder, and the fact that 10 furs meant survival through the long Wyoming winter ahead. He agreed with a single slow nod, and Isabella's smile widened like a gambler who had just drawn a winning hand in a high-stakes poker game. They rode out at dusk, leaving the trading post behind, the sky streaked with vermilion and gold as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. Her camp was a well-appointed tent with a crackling fire and a fine spread of food that smelled like a memory of a home Silas had never actually known. Isabella explained that Whitfield would arrive near midnight, and Silas needed only to scowl, say very little, and look convincingly like a man who would kill for her honor. The hours passed with the strange intimacy of 2 strangers who shared a secret, Isabella talking about her father's empire, while Silas listened mostly in silence. When Whit finally appeared, his expensive boots crunching on the frozen grass, Silas rose to his full height and let his hand rest on his holstered revolver with quiet menace. The cattle baron's face went pale under his Stetson, and he stammered something about a misunderstanding before retreating into the darkness without a single backward glance at the tent. Isabella clapped her hands in genuine delight and handed Silas a heavy pack containing 10 glistening beaver pelts, each one thick and perfect and worth its weight in frontier gold. She offered him coffee and a soft bedroll for the remainder of the night, but Silas felt a sudden gnawing emptiness that the furs could not possibly fill inside his chest. He thanked her curtly, saddled his mare under a cold sliver of moon, and pointed his nose toward home with a strange hollow ache rattling around behind his ribs. Dawn was just beginning to paint the eastern ridges when hunger forced him to stop at a small homestead nestled in a valley of frost-touched cottonwoods and frozen wild roses. A thin spiral of smoke rose from the chimney of a tidy sod-roof cabin, and Silas could hear the gentle lowing of a single milk cow somewhere near a sagging lean-to barn. He called out a greeting as he approached, and the cabin door opened to reveal a young widow named Clara Bennett, whose eyes carried the weary wisdom of profound and recent loss. Her husband had been killed in a cattle stampede 8 months earlier, leaving her with nothing but 40 acres of stubborn ground and an unshakable will to survive. Clara invited him in without hesitation, offering a tin cup of hot chicory and a plate of cornbread that tasted like salvation after a long and lonesome night on the trail. Silas sat at her rough-hewn table and told her about the strange bargain with Isabella, the furs, and the feeling that he had sold something intangible for a pile of pelts. Clara listened without judgment, her work-reddened hands wrapped around her own cup, and then she said something that would change the entire course of his rootless and wandering life. She said that a man's worth wasn't measured by the furs he carried, but by the kindness he showed when nobody was watching and nobody was offering any reward at all. A storm was rolling in over the mountains, a brutal early blizzard that would make the pass impassable, and Clara insisted he stay in the barn until the weather cleared. Silas spent that first day mending her broken corral gate, chopping a mountain of firewood, and repairing the leaky roof on her small barn with patient and grateful hands. They talked through the long evenings about everything and nothing: her lost husband, his orphaned childhood, the way the stars looked over the Wind River Range in deep January. Clara never once looked at his bundle of furs with anything but passing curiosity, and she never asked for a single thing in return for her generous and life-saving hospitality. He learned that she played the fiddle, that she could bake a dried apple pie that tasted like a hymn, and that her laughter could chase away even the darkest frontier shadows. Silas realized on the 5th day, while watching her feed her chickens with a quiet grace, that he wanted to be the man she already seemed to believe he could become. The storm finally broke, leaving the world glittering under a blanket of pure white, but Silas found he had absolutely no desire to saddle his mare and ride away from her. He sold the 10 furs at a fair price to a passing freighter, and he used the money to buy a strong team of draft horses and a proper plow for Clara's stony fields. When he handed her the deed to the team, she cried for the first time since her husband's burial, and Silas felt his own eyes sting with a fierce and protective tenderness. He told her he wanted to stay, not as a hired hand, but as a man who had finally found the one place on earth where his heart could anchor and grow roots. Clara looked at him for a long, searching moment, and then she placed her hand on his scarred knuckles and said she had been praying for a partner, not a savior, for many lonely months. They were married in the little whitewashed church at the crossroads on the first Sunday after the spring thaw, with wildflowers braided into Clara's soft and sun-streaked hair. The rancher who had once been willing to trade his presents for pelts now worked his own land, planting wheat and raising calves with a sense of purpose he had never before tasted. Isabella Fontaine eventually heard the story and sent a letter of congratulations along with a fine silver bridle, admitting that Silas had taught her something profound about the nature of true barter. Silas and Clara built a sprawling ranch house with a wide front porch, and they filled it with the sounds of children's laughter and the smell of fresh bread every single blessed evening. He often thought about that strange night in the tent, the 10 furs that felt like a fortune, and how little they weighed against the immeasurable gift the widow had freely and quietly given him. She had offered him much more than any trapper's bounty. She had offered him a home, a family, a legacy, and a love that would outlast the mountains themselves. Years later, when a young cowhand asked Silas the secret to his obvious contentment, the old rancher just smiled and pointed toward Clara hanging laundry in the golden afternoon sun. He said that some men chase riches their whole lives, but the truly wealthy are those who recognize a widow's tender heart as the rarest and most precious treasure on the frontier. So remember, when you ride through this wild and testing world, that the most valuable trades are never counted in furs or gold or even carefully worded promises offered by strangers. The truest wealth comes quietly, often wrapped in a widow's humble courage, and it stays with you long after the snow melts and the trading post lights go out for the final time. Subscribe to Western Tales Official right now so you never miss another gripping story of love and redemption on the untamed American frontier. Tell me in the comments below if you would have taken the 10 furs or waited for the widow's incredible and life-changing gift of enduring love. Like this video if you believe that the deepest riches are always found in a kind heart rather than a heavy purse, and share it with someone who needs a good Western tale tonight. The wind still whispers across that valley, and if you listen closely, you can hear the echo of a fiddle playing a love song that started with one strange and unforgettable bargain under a watchful Wyoming sky.